Imagine being stranded on an island for 18 long years. And then, one morning, the very spring that kept you alive turns bitter. With no water to drink, Robinson Crusoe and Friday must risk everything, venturing into a forbidden coast where the stones seem to breathe, and the sea itself threatens to swallow them whole. This is the untold chapter of Robinson Crusoe, the Singing Stones. It was, as near as I could reckon, the 18th year of my solitude upon the island, and some months after the strange providence that brought poor Friday to my relief, when an accident befell me which at first I took for a small inconvenience, but soon discovered to be of the most threatening consequence to my whole condition. The little spring which, from the beginning of my settlement, I had esteemed my greatest comfort and daily refreshment, grew suddenly brackish to the taste. I was much amazed at the change. The water, once so cool and sweet, did now leave upon the tongue a savor of salt, as though the sea itself had crept into its veins. I remember saying aloud, though none but Friday was near to hear me, "Here lies the root of life. If water fail me, all fails. My house, my goats, my corn, yea, my very breath depends upon this trickle." Friday, who had gone to fetch the calabash, tasted it also, and made a face of dislike. "Master," says he, pointing to the low ground below the hill, "see come into earth, make water bad." I fell into a deep heaviness of spirit at these words, for I could not deny the reason of them. The rains had been scant, and a trembling of the earth some nights past had loosened the cliff, as I then remembered, so that the ocean might well have invaded the veins of my little spring. "What is to be done, Friday?" I asked him, though my reason told me it was rather to myself I spake than to him. "Shall I perish here for want of what I never lacked before? Am I to drink the sea, or leave my habitation and all my labors spoiled?" Friday looked grave, yet not dismayed. "We go find more," said he simply. I shook my head, for in all the years of my ranging I had never met with another fountain of sweet water, save such as came from the sky in season. Yet I perceived the necessity was urgent, and that without some new provision I must either abandon my plantation or be undone. Thus, by the failing of a brook no bigger than a child's hand, was my peace broken, and my life again set at hazard. I saw clearly that my fortune must drive me into parts of the island I had never dared explore, namely the black headlands that lay beyond the utmost reach of my goats, and which I had ever esteemed desolate and forbidding. "Then," said I at last, forcing my heart to resolution, "we shall go where my fear hath kept me poor. If there be water hid in those cliffs, by God's leave, we will find it." The very next morning, before the heat was up, I set myself to prepare such necessaries as might serve us in an unknown venture. For I resolved that, if the spring were lost, then must I hazard those untrodden parts of the island, howsoever dark and perilous they appeared. First, I examined my stock of cordage, and finding it scant, I busied myself to twist and plait fresh lengths from the inner bark of a tree which I had often used for such work. With Friday's nimble hands joining mine, we contrived a rope of fair strength, long enough to serve as a ladder if the cliffs should demand it. Next I hollowed several reeds, and fitted them to the necks of small gourds, so that I might, by this device, either carry water or draw it from crevices too narrow for the hand. To these I added a tinderbox of charcoal and dry moss, well kept in a goatskin pouch, for we could not tell what darkness we might be compelled to enter. Friday watched me with an air of cheerfulness, though I marked that he glanced now and then towards the east, where the black headland showed itself above the surf like a stern sentinel. "Master," he said with a quiet voice, "we go careful. Men sometimes there." I started at this, for he had never spoken so plain concerning the footsteps of his enemies upon this shore. "What men, Friday?" said I. He shook his head. "Not good men. Cannibal men. Sometimes make fire, then go. Not stay." This gave me fresh uneasiness, yet the necessity of water left me no retreat. I answered with as steady a tone as I might, "Then we shall go as the fox goes, Friday, light of step and quick of ear. Better to meet the hazard abroad than to wither of thirst at home." Friday nodded and smiled, showing his white teeth. "Master brave, we find water." That night, before we lay down, I scratched upon a small board a rude table of the moon's course and the hours of the tide, that I might the better observe the sea's advance and retreat, which I suspected had to do with the spring's corruption. This board I carried in my pack, along with a hatchet, a knife, 2 pistols, and powder wrapped safe from the damp. Thus furnished, we commended ourselves to the mercy of heaven, and set our feet at dawn towards the forbidden coast. We had not traveled above 3 miles ere the land began to alter its accustomed face. The ground, which on my side of the island was ever green and clothed with thickets, grew bare and harsh, as if the storms had beaten it into submission. Great fragments of rock, black and shining, were strewn along the shore, and the air seemed full of the murmur of hidden caverns, where the sea broke inward with a hollow thunder. The goats, which I had driven once this way in former years, would ever turn back at a certain ridge, and now I perceived the reason, for the place had an aspect both barren and fearful. Even Friday, bold as he was, grew grave, and held his spear close in hand. At the foot of a tall crag, where the surf leapt continually in spray, I paused to take note of the tide. I drove a staff into the sand, and marked the water's climb against it. "See, Friday," said I. "The sea makes her march as a soldier keeps the drum. She advances, then halts, then retreats. If I can but read her order, I may learn how she has corrupted my spring." Friday watched in silence, then said, "Sea strong here. Master hear sound?" Indeed I did. A strange hollow booming, as of a beast breathing in its sleep, issuing from the cliff itself. This put me into a great wonder and some dread, but I composed myself and wrote the hour upon my board. "Observe it well, lad," said I. "All nature keeps her book. It is for us to turn the leaves." We went on slowly, the rocks jagged under our feet, and the sea pressing hard upon our right hand. Once we came upon a hollow, where the waves eddied in a circle, like a whirlpool, and dashed driftwood against the wall of stone. Friday laid his hand upon my arm. "Master," said he low, "this place bad. Sea eat land." I confess my heart quailed at the sight, yet the thought of the bitter spring behind us urged me on. "Then let us learn how she eats," said I, "for knowledge is our bread. Fear shall not drive us back." So we pressed forward along that grim coast, with the roar of the surf in our ears and the unknown rising before us. Advancing with much caution, we came into a narrow ravine which opened suddenly betwixt 2 cliffs, and there beheld such tokens as set my mind at once upon its guard. For in the sand were the blackened hollows of old fires, filled with ashes yet not wholly scattered by the wind, and about them lay heaps of broken shells, as of some feast long past. Among these relics Friday stooped and lifted a piece of cane, charred at one end, which might well have been a spit for roasting. He held it in silence, his brow clouded, then cast it down again with a look of loathing. "Master," he whispered, "men here, eat flesh here." At this my very blood ran chill, for though I had often suspected such visits to other parts of the island, I had not looked to find their traces in this quarter. I gazed long upon the hollow places where the fires had been, and in my fancy I could almost see the wretches gathered, their cruel feast spread, and their victims' cries borne away on the surf. "We are seen though we see none," said I in a low voice. "Therefore let us go with eyes behind us as well as before." Friday nodded, and, to conceal our passage, we brushed over our footprints with branches, and set discreet markers of our own devising, such as I had learnt in my first years of wood ranging. As we went deeper into the ravine, the cliffs closed above so that the light was half lost. The sound of the sea became muffled, and only the drip of water from the rocks broke the silence. My heart was heavy within me, for not only did I fear to meet with those savages whose cruelty was without name, but I perceived that we were now beyond all country I had ever ranged, and wholly at the mercy of Providence. Yet still the thought of our corrupted spring at home drove me onward. "Better," said I inwardly, "to hazard men's malice abroad than to lie down and die of thirst within my own fence." Thus, with fear behind and dread before, we pushed on, each step seeming to draw us further from safety, and deeper into some dark mystery of the island. We had not gone a furlong farther, when the ravine came to an abrupt stop against a wall of rock so sheer and lofty that, for a time, I confess I was wholly disheartened. The cliff rose like a fortress, black and polished with spray, and no path wound either to the right or to the left whereby we might go around it. Friday, whose eye was quick, pointed upward where a ledge broke the face of the cliff, some 20 feet above our heads. "Master," said he, "we climb there." I looked and shook my head, for the rock was smooth as glass in many places, and my years of solitude had not improved my agility. Yet the necessity drove me. I set about fastening our rope into a ladder, knotting it with care and throwing the end about a jutting spur. Friday went first, climbing with the nimbleness of a cat, his spear slung across his back. When my turn came, I set my foot upon the lowest loop and pulled myself up. Twice I made progress, but on the third step my hand slipped, and I struck my shin cruelly against the rock, so that I almost lost my hold altogether. The pain was sharp, and for a moment my courage failed me. "Master, hold! Rope strong!" Friday called down, steadying the line from above. I clung, panting, and spoke half to him, half to myself. "Pride is but a cracked rung. Better trust the line than my own presumption." So saying, I set my foot more carefully, and at last, with Friday's help, gained the ledge, though bruised and sore. From that perch we had a view outward to sea, where the sun broke through the clouds and turned the foam to silver. Yet behind us, in the hollow of the cliff, there came a faint murmur, unlike either wind or surf, but more as though the very stone had a voice of its own, humming far within. Friday cocked his head and whispered, "Master here? Stones sing." I listened and indeed heard it, a low resonance, as of a kettle boiling deep in the earth. The sound struck me with a kind of wonder, mingled with dread, for it seemed not natural. "Mark it well, Friday," said I, "for all things have their signification, and perchance even these dark rocks may hide that which we came to seek." So we pressed on along the ledge, sore in body and anxious in spirit, yet resolute to discover what mystery lay in the heart of the black wall. The ledge, though narrow and perilous, brought us at length to a kind of shelf or platform, overhung by the cliff above, where all was strangely still. Here, even the roar of the sea seemed muffled, as though we had stepped into another chamber of the world. While we paused to take breath, there came to my ear a singular sound. Not the hollow booming I had heard below, but a soft dripping joined to a faint resonance, as if the stones themselves did answer every drop with a tone, like the ringing of a bell heard deep under water. Friday touched my arm and whispered, "Stones sing true, master. Water talk there." I bent low, and found a fissure in the rock, scarce wider than the breadth of my hand, from which issued both the drip and the curious humming. I thrust my staff within to probe, but the sand and gravel at the mouth gave way suddenly, and my legs sank in up to the knee. The stone edges pinched me fast, and the sharp rock tore my flesh. I cried out, "Friday, I am taken!" In an instant the poor fellow was at my side, setting his spear against the crack for leverage, and with all his strength prizing it open while he drew me forth. My leg came free at last, sorely bruised and bleeding, and I was forced to bind it up with a strip of linen torn from my shirt. Friday looked on with great concern. "Master hurt bad?" "Not so bad, but I shall mend," said I, though in truth the pain was great. "'Tis a lesson written plain upon my shin, that I must not rush into every hole the earth opens." We rested a while upon the shelf, husbanding our strength. Yet I noted with disquiet that our water gourds were near spent, for the toil of climbing had parched us both, and the day was grown sultry. Worse, the sky to seaward was heavy with clouds, foretelling a storm. Still the memory of that humming fissure would not leave me. "There is mystery in these rocks, Friday," said I. "The very stones do speak of water within. If we can but learn the language, we may find our remedy." He nodded gravely. "We listen. We wait. Water tell us." Thus, weary and wounded, yet filled with a strange expectation, we made ready to push deeper into the unknown, though I confess I went with a heart more anxious than resolute. We had not lingered long upon that rocky shelf before the sky darkened in earnest, and a sudden squall from the east drove sheets of rain upon us with such violence that we could scarce see our own feet. The wind roared round the headland, and the sea, rising with the tide, flung itself against the cliff so furiously that we were compelled to seek shelter without delay. By good fortune, or as I rather account it, by providence, we found a low arch at the cliff's base, half hidden by a tumble of stones. Thither we crept, stooping low, and discovered a cavern running inward some yards. Here the air was close and heavy, and the floor uneven, but it gave us refuge from the tempest without. Yet scarcely had we sat down upon the stones when I perceived a most extraordinary thing. The cave itself seemed to breathe. At one moment a cool draught came rushing outward, so that our lamp flame bent low. The next, a damp heaviness drew inward, as though the very sea were inhaling. Along with this came a hollow sighing, which gave the place a most unearthly character. Friday, sitting close by me, said softly, "See, take breath. When strong, we small." I confess my courage sank at these words, for it was plain the tide had its course into this very cavern, and if the flood should rise high, it might fill the place and overwhelm us where we sat. Already the surf outside boomed nearer, and the lamp sputtered with the damp. "If the flood master us, we are undone," said I aloud, though my heart quaked as I spake it. Friday laid his hand upon my shoulder. "Master strong, we wait. Tide go back." But I could not share his composure. The gourd that carried our water was now empty, and my leg throbbed sore from the bruise. The darkness pressed in on every side, the cave sight like some monstrous creature sleeping, and each fresh rush of the sea seemed to threaten us with instant death. In that moment I thought myself at my lowest ebb since the day I was first cast ashore. For hunger may be borne, and solitude endured, but thirst, storm, and the menace of the sea together left me near despair. I lifted my heart in secret prayer. "Lord, if it be thy will, let me not perish here in the bowels of the earth, but show me a way where none appears." Thus we sat in gloom, waiting on the tide's pleasure, with fear in every sound, and the breath of the cave rising and falling about us like the pulse of some hidden giant. Long we sat in that gloomy vault, while the storm without spent its fury, and the tide crept higher with every moment. My heart was full of heaviness, and I confess I thought my end very near, when suddenly I marked a change. The breath of the cave, which had drawn so violently inward, slackened, and for a space the air moved outward, as though the sea had grown weary of pursuit. I looked upward to the narrow opening, where a rent in the stone allowed a glimpse of the sky, and there beheld the moon breaking through a ragged cloud. At that instant the inward rush ceased, and a draught cool and sweet flowed outward past my face. "Friday," I cried, "mark it well. The flood comes in with the moon, and slackens when she is high." He nodded, as one to whom such knowledge was not strange. "See, follow moon. Always so. Master, see now." The thought struck me with great force, that here was a key to our deliverance. For if the sea obeyed a rule, then might we contrive our escape by the same rule, watching the moon and waiting upon her order. Moreover, it came into my remembrance how once, in my earlier contrivances, I had fashioned a little siphon from reeds and a goatskin bladder, whereby I proved which way water would run though unseen. Now I resolved to turn the same experiment to profit. With Friday's help, I split one of our reed tubes and set the gourd at its mouth, then placed it near the clefts where the cave did breathe. Each time the cave inhaled, I marked how the gourd was drawn gently inward, and when it exhaled, the gourd rolled back, leaving a faint dampness upon the stone. "See here," said I eagerly. "These cracks do not all speak of the sea. Some draw from within the land, and if from the land, then may it be fresh water that hides behind them." Friday's eyes shone. "Yes, master. Water live in stone." We listen more. So we set ourselves, with what patience we could muster, to observe the rhythm of the tide and the whispering of the clefts, hoping thereby to find a vein of sweet water that might save us from ruin. Though my body was sore and my spirit spent, I felt within me the first stirrings of hope, as a spark under ashes, and I resolved that, come what might, I would not quit the search until I had drawn forth life from the very singing stones themselves. Through that night of fear and watching, we continued our trial of the clefts, setting the gourds as feelers to mark where the inward draught was coolest. At length, near the deepest part of the cave, We found a seam so narrow it scarce admitted the blade of my knife. Yet from it issued a breath of air moist and chill, unlike the briny damp of the sea. Friday bent low and laid his cheek against the stone. "Master," said he softly, "hear water sing, stone cold. Good sign." My heart leapt, for I felt a like coolness. We resolved to test it further. With wedges of wood and a small fire of drift we heated the outer rock, then quenched it suddenly with seawater, whereby the stone cracked along its grain. With much patience we scraped and prized at the seam, till the fissure widened a little. Presently a bead of clear water gathered at the lip, trickling down the face of the stone. Friday put forth his hand, caught a drop upon his finger, and tasted it. His eyes brightened. "Sweet!" he cried. "Sweet water!" I myself tasted, and found it fresher than any I had drunk since first I landed upon the island. At this discovery my spirits, which had been low as death, were raised at once to thankfulness, and I lifted up my heart in gratitude. "Blessed be the hand that hid it here," I said aloud. "In the bosom of these black rocks hath the Lord prepared a fountain for us." We lost no time in setting the reeds to guide the little stream into our gourds, which we filled drop by drop. Though the flow was small, yet it was constant, and in time supplied us sufficiently to ease our thirst. Friday, drinking with delight, said between mouthfuls, "Master, water live in stone. Good friend stone." I smiled at his simplicity, yet in truth my own heart echoed him. Never had draught of wine tasted half so sweet to me as those first gulps of clear water, drawn by our labor from the singing fisher. Thus it was that, in the very belly of the cave where we looked for death, we found the spring of life. Having refreshed ourselves with that miraculous draught, our next care was how to win free of the cave. For though the tide had slackened, the rocks without were beaten by the surf so violently that no ordinary passage could be attempted. The entrance we had crept through was now half drowned, and the sea flung spray into the very mouth of the cavern. Friday, who had been long silent, at last pointed to a jutting buttress of rock a little aside from the cave's mouth, which hung over the sea like the arm of a giant. "Master," said he, "we swing there, make rope chair, go safe." At first I scarce understood his meaning, but he showed me by signs how we might fashion a boatswain's chair, such as I had once contrived aboard ship, when men were lowered over the side to caulk the seams. The thought gave me some comfort, for it was a seaman's device, and I had skill in such things. With our bark rope and a piece of goat hide, we made a loop strong enough to bear a man's weight, and fixed it firm about a spur of stone within the cave. Friday, being more active, offered himself to go first. He seated himself in the loop, grasped the line above, and with a shout swung out over the foam, the sea roaring beneath him. By good providence he gained the buttress and hauled himself upon it, calling back with a laugh, "Good way, master. Come now." My own heart failed me somewhat at the sight, yet there was no choice but to follow. I set myself in the chair, commended my soul to God, and thrust off. The spray leapt up and drenched me. The rope strained and creaked, but by steady hauling I reached the rock, where Friday's hand seized mine and drew me safe beside him. We lay there a while, panting and thankful, while the tide spent its last force beneath us. Then, creeping along the ridge, we found a path by which we descended clear of the surf, our gourds of sweet water slung carefully at our sides. "Master Strong," said Friday, smiling, "now we go home. Water come with us." "Aye, lad," I answered, my spirit lifted. "But let us first mark well the place, for here lieth a treasure greater than gold." Thus, by a contrivance born of seamanship and necessity, we escaped that perilous cavern, and bore with us the means of life itself. Once we had returned by cautious ways to my dwelling, our first labor was to secure this newfound blessing, that it might not serve us for a single deliverance only, but become a daily provision. For I had learnt in all my years upon the island that chance may give a man a gift, but industry alone makes it his own. The next day, therefore, Friday and I set out again by the inland path we had contrived, climbing with much toil till we came above the cleft where the water issued. There we cut lengths of hollow bamboo, which grew plentiful near my plantation, and joined them together so as to form a conduit. This we led downward by slow degrees, fixing the joints with clay and binding them round with strips of bark. At the end we placed a great calabash set in the ground, to serve as a cistern. To make the water more wholesome, I fashioned a filter of sand, charcoal, and cloth, through which it passed before it came to the vessel. Thus, what had been but a trickle in the stone was turned into a constant fountain at my door. Friday watched the water falling clear into the calabash, and clapped his hands. "Master make river walk to house," he said merrily. "Aye," said I. "Yet it is not my wit, but Providence that first shewed the vein. My part is but to tend what is given." We spent several days perfecting the work, noting also the hours of the moon and tide, that we might better understand when the flow was strongest. I entered these observations carefully upon my board, for I had grown exact in such matters, knowing my life might hang upon them. At the same time, I considered how dangerous it would be should the savages discover our new fountain. Therefore, to hide the approach, we set false tracks leading away, and planted brush to cover the true path. I even raised a small paling round the cistern, over which we laid branches, so that none passing by should guess at the treasure concealed beneath. Thus, what had begun in fear and near despair was turned, by labor and good order, into a source of strength and plenty, the like of which I had never before enjoyed upon the island. In a little time the fruits of our labor became manifest. The barley, which before had withered for lack of rain, now stood green and vigorous, being refreshed by measured watering from our new cistern. The goats, too, grew tractable when we led them daily to a trough we had contrived, where the clear stream fell without ceasing. Thus my plantation, which had threatened ruin, was restored to better estate than ever before. One evening, as the sun went down, Friday stood gazing at the fountain, and said thoughtfully, "Water find friend, we help water." His words, though simple, struck me deeply. "Nay, Friday," I answered, "it is rather the water hath helped us, and he that ordered the moon to rule the tide hath taught me to mind her. I was poor because I feared to go where my eyes had not looked. Now I am rich because I dared and was instructed." Friday smiled and said, "Master and I, we too, make island bigger." "Aye," said I, "and we too shall explore it wholly, for it is not meet to dwell so many years in a land and know but half its secrets. From this time forth I will be a stranger no longer upon mine own island." So ended that adventure which began in bitterness and near despair, yet was turned to my exceeding comfort. By it I learned not only the bounty that may lie hid in the most forbidding places, but also the virtue of observation, the strength of companionship, and the necessity of humble dependence upon the providence that guides all things. And each time I heard the gentle trickle in my cistern, I counted it not merely water, but a psalm sung daily to remind me that no man is forsaken who sets his trust aright. From despair in the dark cave to the discovery of life flowing from the stone, Robinson Crusoe's hidden adventure reminds us that courage, faith, and friendship can turn fear into hope. If you enjoyed this forgotten tale of survival and resourcefulness, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more timeless story adventures. Until the next journey, thank you for listening.